When people hear medieval maple syrup, they imagine something familiar: Canada, maple trees, bottles. But the one we're talking about today comes from medieval Europe, long before maple syrup became a commodity. It required weeks of waiting. It appeared for barely 2 weeks each year, and turning it into syrup was only one of many uses. You'll see why in a moment. It emerged when winter loosened its grip, before leaves formed, while the forest still looked dead, and then it was gone again. That tree wasn't maple, it was birch. And that changes the entire story, because birch sap behaves nothing like maple sap. It's thinner, less sweet, and turning it into syrup was so inefficient that most medieval people rarely bothered. But that's the mistake modern viewers make, thinking syrup was the goal. For medieval Europeans, syrup was almost an accident, a side experiment, a curiosity. What they actually waited for was the sap itself, fresh, clear, pulled straight from the tree while the forest still looked lifeless. And once you understand that, birch sap stops being the medieval maple syrup and becomes something far more interesting: a seasonal drink, a medicine, a ritual marker, and the first living liquid after winter. And that's where the real story begins. Not all birch trees looked the same. In lowland marshes, their bark stayed gray and soft. In higher ground, it turned bright white and peeled like paper. Some had hanging branches, others stood firm against the wind. Today we'd call them silver birch, moor birch, even paper birch. Back then, no one cared for names. What mattered was this: not all looked the same, but all gave the same gift: birch sap. Across medieval and early modern Europe, especially in Scandinavia, the Baltics, Poland, and parts of Germany, birch sap was known as a rare seasonal gift. It didn't come from the market. It came from the forest, quietly, for just a few weeks each spring. It appeared when the frost retreated but the leaves hadn't yet opened, just a narrow window where the sap, under pressure, rose silently through the tree. People would tap it with a small borehole or a clean cut through the bark. A mature birch could yield up to 2 gallons per day, and over 44 gallons in a single season. But unlike the Canadian sugar maple, which can be tapped every year and whose sweet sap gave rise to a billion-dollar syrup industry, the birch needed rest. Traditional harvesters knew a tapped tree needed rest, and pushing it too far could kill it. That's why traditional harvesters always left at least 2 years between tap cycles. They knew birch gives freely, but not endlessly. The sap was clear, almost tasteless at first sip, but rich in minerals, electrolytes, and compounds like saponins, which we now know help your body absorb nutrients more efficiently. It also contained roughly 5 kilocalories per 100 grams, light but vital after a winter diet of salted and dried foods. Still, the real confusion comes from a modern myth, a myth with the word sugar in its name. Many people today know the term birch sugar, or xylitol, a natural sweetener used in gum, toothpaste, and low-carb snacks. It sounds like it comes from the sap, but it doesn't. Here's the twist: xylitol isn't found in birch sap at all. Xylitol is extracted from birch bark, or even from corn cobs, using high heat and sulfuric acid in an industrial process discovered centuries later. It's not part of traditional birch tapping. It was never drunk from the tree, but the name stuck, and with it, a completely false idea of what birch sap really is. In reality, birch sap wasn't about sweetness. It was about freshness, immediacy, and rhythm. You couldn't bottle it. You couldn't ship it. It didn't last. You had to go to the tree. And when you did, something else happened. Something deeper than hydration. It marked a shift, from winter to spring, from scarcity to renewal. Nature didn't give second chances. If you missed the moment, you waited another year. So when the signs appeared, people moved fast, with tools, with knowledge, with care. Harvesting birch sap wasn't complicated, but it required attention, timing, and patience. It began in early spring, usually sometime between March and April, when daytime temperatures rose above freezing, but nighttime temperatures still dropped below zero. This fluctuation created pressure inside the tree, causing the sap to rise from the roots to the canopy, nourishing the buds before they opened. To collect it, people would either cut a shallow notch in the bark or drill a small hole into the trunk, just deep enough to reach the sapwood, usually 2 to 5 centimeters deep and about 2 meters above ground. A hollow twig, reed, or later a carved wooden spout would guide the sap into a waiting container, often a wooden pail or clay vessel. Within minutes, the clear liquid would start to drip, slowly but steadily. But harvesters needed to be careful. Too many holes, too deep a cut, and the sensitive birch could weaken or even die from the stress. That flow of sap lasted only for a short stretch, 2 to 3 weeks, until the first green leaves appeared. After that, the flavor turned bitter, the flow declined, and the harvest was over. What they did after the harvest might surprise you because they didn't reduce it into syrup, not usually. Birch sap has far less sugar than maple, just 0.5 to 1.5%, compared to maple's 2 to 3%. To make even 1 gallon of birch syrup, you'd need to boil over 100 gallons of birch sap for hours, risking burnt sugars, wasted firewood, and bitter results. Now you see why turning it into syrup was rare and just one of many uses. If syrup was made at all, it was in tiny batches, carefully reduced over low heat, with constant stirring to avoid burning. Birch sap contains fructose, which caramelizes quickly and can easily scorch. As a result, birch syrup never became a staple in medieval kitchens. It remained a local curiosity often reserved for the wealthy. Instead, they drank it fresh, cool, refreshing, pulled straight from the tree, or they let it ferment. The fermentation, the transformation, the inventions, that's the story for the next chapter. In medieval and early modern Europe, birch sap wasn't just a drink. It was considered a seasonal remedy, a cleansing tonic, and a natural stimulant after months of preserved winter food. Because of its natural sugars, electrolytes, and trace minerals, the sap was considered restorative, something the body craved after winter. And beyond that, the clear liquid is rich in vitamin C, B vitamins, enzymes, amino acids, and antioxidants. In many regions, it was the first fresh drink available after months of dried and salted food. Many villages let the sap ferment into a low-alcohol drink, sweetened with honey, flavored with herbs, or simply left plain. It was taken in the mornings, often before meals, as a gut starter and mood lifter. Doctors, herbalists, and ordinary people valued birch sap for its gentle medicinal properties. In folk medicine, it was used to treat a wide range of ailments, kidney and bladder issues. Birch sap was believed to be diuretic, helping to flush out toxins and reduce swelling. Gout and rheumatism. Traditional healers prescribed it as part of spring purification cures to ease joint pain and stiffness. Skin problems. In parts of Germany and Russia, it was drunk to improve complexion or applied externally to treat eczema and rashes. Hair and scalp care. Birch sap was also used in homemade hair rinses, said to reduce dandruff and stimulate hair growth. Some recipes combined sap with birch bark or birch leaves for added potency. But there was more, not just on the medicinal or culinary side, but something older, more symbolic, and harder to define. Long before written medicine or folk remedies, the birch tree held symbolic power in early European cultures, especially among the Celts. In the Celtic tree calendar, birch, Betula, marked the first lunar month of the year. It was the tree of new beginnings, purification, and rebirth. After winter, when all seemed dead, the birch was the first to show signs of life, its bark gleaming white against dark forests, its sap flowing even before leaves appeared. Because of this, birch was linked to cleansing rituals and fertility rites. In reconstructed spring festivals like Beltane, May 1st, it played a central role. Birch branches were used to sweep away the old year, both symbolically and literally. In some traditions, young couples jumped over birch fires to bless their union with fertility and health. Druidic practices, though largely lost to history, are believed to have involved harvesting birch sap at the equinox or Beltane, using it in sacred rites. Modern reconstructions suggest that life mead, a fermented mix of birch sap and honey, may have been shared in ritual cups, representing the first drink of the year drawn directly from the land. The birch grove, or Birkenhain, often appears in mythology as a liminal place, a gateway between the worlds. In Slavic and Germanic traditions, it was also associated with protection, spring maidens, and female deities of renewal. Today, we can't say with certainty how birch sap was used in early religious rites, but the timing, the symbolism, and the ritual use of trees all point to something deeper than just nutrition. For those who lived close to the land, birch wasn't just a tree. It was a sign, a threshold, and each spring, a source of life. Unlike maple syrup, which became a large-scale product in North America, birch sap was never easy to commercialize. It doesn't store well, spoils quickly, and yields little syrup. It was highly regional, limited to cold climate areas with mature birch forests and tied to local manual collection. Then came refined sugar, cane syrup, and eventually industrial sweeteners. By the 18th and 19th centuries, sugar had become more affordable, portable, and consistent. The seasonal rhythm of tapping trees for a few liters of watery sap couldn't compete with bags of white crystals that lasted forever. Birch sap faded into memory. A few rural families continued tapping trees for spring rituals or health remedies, especially in the Baltics and parts of Russia, but it vanished from cookbooks and trade routes. Today, it's starting to reappear, rebranded as a Nordic detox drink or a natural electrolyte water, often sold in glass bottles for premium prices. But most people drinking it have no idea they're part of a tradition going back 1,000 years. The product returned, but the story didn't.